All right, guys, this is Pastor Josh. I wanted to make a little video on how we use Logic. So Logic Pro is a DAW, a digital audio workstation that is produced by Apple. Anyone that has experience with Apple or Mac products has probably heard of GarageBand. It used to come, it doesn't come anymore on new Macs, but it used to be sort of like the stock equipment that showed up, the stock software that showed up on a computer, and it was just a digital audio workstation. It's a place to record audio, make arrangement changes, do cut and splice, and do some editing, effects, and all that good stuff as well. Well, Logic Pro is the big brother to GarageBand. So we're going to jump in here and look at what we use Logic for, the things that we can use Logic for. And so if you were to open a new Logic file, you'd see something like this. You'd see where you'll see there's no tracks. There will be tracks populated here in this area here in a second, but the first thing it wants us to do, because you have to have a track, it wants to know what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to do. So if you're recording a software instrument, that would be like MIDI, over keyboard or something like that, would be a software instrument. You can play the keyboard and make it sound like a violin or a guitar or whatever you want to do. That is what the software instrument is. And then we have audio. These are the two most common: external MIDI, guitar and bass, and drummer are all things that are specific to Logic at least. And so the guitar or bass is simply an audio file, an audio track that already has some loaded default patches that will be brought in at the same time. If it's just an audio file, then it's not going to do anything to it. It's not going to bring any kind of image or anything to it. But for the drummer, that's actually something that Logic does, where they have like a computer drummer. You can base off of styles, and you can actually change kits and players. So you can have a rock kit with an R&B player, and change up their style and the way they play and stuff like that, all from that. First thing we're going to do is just start with an audio track. So when we are looking at our setup that we have in Logic here now, there's a few things that we need to bring, that we need to know what they are firstly, so we know where we're at and where we're going. We'll start with the top of our little taskbar here, and obviously this is rewind, fast forward, stop, play, record. And then this is the loop function, or cycle is what Logic is going to call it. So the cycle would just loop these 4 measures right here, and when it got to the end of measure 4, it would jump back to measure 1. But of course you can move that around in time if you wanted to loop a different section, or if you wanted to loop more or less, you can do that as well. All right, here in the top, we basically have like project info up here. So this first set right here is the playhead position. And this is the playhead. This is this little triangle thing on top with this long vertical line throughout the entire screen there. And if we were to press play, we see that playhead moving in time. But another thing that we see still in this playhead position is which bar and beat that playhead is currently in. So we could let this run for the rest of forever here, and we would see that this is continuing to count wherever we are. We're in measure 11 now. So we'd be here in 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 14, right? And so all those are set up. And so that reflects that information. The rest of this project information is the tempo, as well as the time signature and key. If you're doing a large project, I do recommend setting up the key in the correct key signature that you're recording all these things in. If you ever needed to make a change, a global change later on, meaning I want to take this entire song from C major to B flat, everything that is done in MIDI or in these software instrument deals here will automatically be changed. So if I recorded a song in C on this classic electric piano and then wanted to just change that piano from C to B flat, I would just come up here and find B flat, and that would now, all of the transposition would happen for us. We wouldn't have to go in and transpose each and every one of these tracks, because I'm going to show you an example here in a second where we can have tons of tracks, and that can get very time consuming to go through and to mess with all that. Obviously, you want your tempo and your time signature to be correct so that you can, like if we were to be recording and we said that maybe verse 1 starts at measure 11 right here, then we would know where we are. We could say, well, I want 2 intros instead of 1 intro. And so I could take this segment, I could highlight what I needed. Well, there's nothing there to highlight right now, but I could highlight what I would need, and I could literally just copy and paste and add that time, quote unquote, add that time back to it. And then there would be 2 intros before verse 1 happened, and that would make it at 19 if they were 8 measures each. And so, yeah, that is without having the time and the time signature and the tempo set up, we would just be guessing. We would have to zoom way, way, way in right here and try to find where the downbeat was, because these bar lines, these markers that are here, are not going to be reflecting what we have. All right, I just did it, but just to show you here, there is a zoom function that is over on this top right-hand section. And of course, far right is completely zoomed in, far left is completely zoomed out. You'll notice that these are horizontal arrows pointing away from each other. We also have vertical arrows pointing away from each other, so we can control the amount of quote-unquote zoom vertically as well as horizontally. This helps later on if we were to record like a vocal in this line right here. We may, it may not be, the waveform may show up really small, and it's just like little bitty blips that are showing up above the static line of 0 that runs down through here. I'll show you all this here in a second. But we could zoom in on that and sort of get more of that waveform, make it taller. That way we can actually, if we're looking for a detail or looking for something that we need to punch in, that's another good vocabulary word when dealing with studio stuff. Punching in is just redoing, recreating, or re-recording something that you've already recorded. And so instead of re-recording the entire vocal part, when all it was one little wrong note at the beginning of measure 11 here, I could give our singer 4 beats, we would hit record, and we would have the 4-beat lead in, and then they could start singing at measure 11 right there. So this is that static line that I'm telling you about. It's 0, it's just showing you that it is recording. If we had a microphone set up to this right now and I were to be talking, you would see the waveform beginning to show up, and that is going to be above and below the line as that waveform shows up. That is the above is the right-hand side and below is the left-hand side, because all of these are stereo channels. So when you see that waveform show up, it's going to show up from 0 both directions at the same rate, depending on how loud the particular source may be. All right. So I'm going to get into another, we're not going to save this one, another, it's actually a template that we use, and this is how we do, if you've listened to any of our Worship Wednesdays or anything like that, this is how we record anytime that we're in a full band type setting. We use this template right here. We call it the live stream template, but we use it for lots of different things. And you'll see that everything is set up fairly nicely in here. I'm going to expand all of these just so we can get a full feel for everything that is in here. So there are 98 tracks, 98 plus tracks that are in this. And again, these are all tracks that are set up. Over on this left-hand side is our channel strip. And so that sort of shows where we are. If you select a particular channel, over on this left-hand side is this whole block right here is called the inspector. And the inspector is going to show you a more traditional channel strip. You've probably seen a fader before on a console or something like that. And so this may make a little bit more sense for you if you've used a console before. Normally, you have like gain structure here at the top, and that's actually what this is EQ and gain structure. So we have total gain that we can mess with over here. We can adjust the EQs as we need to, depending on who's singing, or if it's male or female or whatever it is. We can adjust all that. We have the input routing, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. And then it goes through all the different plugins here. We have 2 different mix buses. One is vocal reverb. You can see that, send 1, bus 1, vocal reverb. And this is send 2, bus 2, vocal delay. And so I can adjust the amount of reverb that is on this particular channel. I can adjust the amount of delay that is on this particular channel, or I can adjust the overall reverb. When I clicked back on reverb, this showed up as a channel strip for reverb. And this is like the total reverb. I can turn all the reverbs down, all the reverbs up, however I want to do it. Depending on what style of music you're recording, that can be very beneficial, because if you have something that is very, lots of ambiance and very ethereal and doesn't really have a real shape to it, it's just sort of morphing around, then instead of going to every one of these channel strips and turning the reverb up, I could just leave everyone's reverb where it's set and just adjust the whole global reverb, all the vocal reverb in this sense, up. So we'll notice that that is a vocal reverb. Over here in the top, we have a few things. That inspector is selected right now, so that's what's showing up there. But there's a few other things that we have here. These are EQ controls for this particular channel, for purple. And again, we can see that it is the track that we're dealing with here. We can also do master EQ, to where we are looking at the overall EQ for everything that is leaving Logic. The other thing that I'd really like to use is this mixer pane here. Again, if you've used a console, then this is very familiar for you. This looks like what most people are looking at on a Sunday morning. Obviously, this is a digital version of it, but everything is here and in order. So again, as we come in, this is our same purple mic that we've been talking about this whole time, that same channel strip. These are the same reverbs and delays that I was adjusting earlier over here in the inspector, but everything is just laid out. You'll obviously see the levels show up in this little black vertical rectangle right here. You'll be able to see those levels as they are coming up. And of course, you can make adjustments to the fader and to the level. If you also notice, the fader over in the inspector is adjusting at the same rate that the fader in the mixer is, because they're the same fader. It's maybe kind of hard to wrap your head around. And if I scroll up right here, this is the channel strip that is still in our timeline here. And as I adjust it, you'll notice that the quote-unquote fader that is on that channel strip is also adjusting, because they are all the same thing. They are not independent of each other. You don't have to make sure that this one's up and this one's up and this one's up. Like, they all control the exact same thing. That's the whole point of it. All right, so we use these, again, we use a Dante network, Dante Virtual Sound Card, and so that is just a piece of software that allows us to connect our digital console that is at front of house to this computer. And so we have all that set up. If you needed to set yours up, it is in this Logic Pro here, Preferences and Audio. Again, mine is set up for DVS, Dante Virtual Sound Card, as both the input and output devices. And that's going to give us 32 channels that are coming in to the system right here. Now, we talked about having 98 plus channels on this project. So why are we only sending 32? Because 32 is really what we need. We're not going to be running, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're not going to be running all 9 of those microphones at the same time. But we will be running all, 12 or 13 of these drum channels at the same time. We've got to have an electric guitar. We've got to have an acoustic guitar. We've got to have a piano. We have a synth, which is like an aux keys for us. And then we have our backing tracks coming in. So the way that this is set up is it has 32 channels of backing track. And you'll notice that that's backing track all the way to 32 right there. And so we normally only utilize the first 2, and that is how we send stereo. That's because we're sending stereo tracks to the board anyway, so we send those stereo tracks back to Logic. And of course, we can mix those in relationship to what we're actually recording live with the rest of these instruments here. So input 5 coming in, well, let's stay on purple here. Input 9 is the channel that we have dedicated for this purple microphone. And again, if we ever needed to adjust that, you can just select it, and then you can come down and choose a different input. The routing is as simple as that. Say whoever normally uses this green mic now we got the EQ dialed in on the purple mic, but now they have to use the green mic to do that. We can either we can duplicate this this channel strip. The way we do that is this little button right here, and that is new track with duplicate settings. I'm all about hotkeys, and I'm glad that Logic puts that in there, but it is Command D. If you're selecting a track, you can hotkey Command D. And again, we have another purple track with identical, you can see it in the mixer right here. Everything is the same. It's been completely copied. All the same plugins, all the same input routing, all the same EQ, the faders at the same rate. If we had like pan and stuff like that set up, all that would be identical. And so it is, it's a great tool to use. But again, if we ever wanted to change this and say, I don't know, something happened to the microphone or something happened to the channel in the board or something like that, we could just simply change that to being input 8 instead of input 9. While I'm on this subject, you'll notice that both of these are input 8, and both of these would record if we sent source over input 8, both of these would record at the exact same time, even with the different settings. Even though the settings aren't global on this, they use a lot of the same presets and plugins, but they would be recorded simultaneously at the same time there. And so, meaning you can use this to your advantage. You can have some fun with this. You can record just a nothing on this. You can turn these plugins off. There's a little power button that shows up when you hover over it, and it's a quick way just to cut them off. You can get a completely dry signal coming in and then have a completely affected signal coming in, and then mix between those two, or that's the same thing that you're doing as you add and reduce reverb. So it's just a good little tool to have. I love Dante Virtual Sound Card. It is a little finicky to get set up and to get stable, but once it is set up the correct way, it is extremely stable, extremely efficient in what it does. And so really the next cool thing that we can kind of talk about here as far as what we do, I'm going to get some of this stuff out of the way. So we record, I have mine labeled, but the rest of these are like female vocal leads. And so obviously we have different things that are different plugins that are going to be set up on each of these individual channel strips. And again, that is for whatever we need in that moment. Like my EQ is going to be different than, one of the female lead vocalists. Because we sing in different registers, we have different tones, and that's just the EQ is going to be different. So we can set up all these different ones to be separate from here. But we can then group all of these. If you'll notice, there's like this little box that shows up, and then that corner's cut off right there, and this creates a group of these 9 microphones inside of this vocal submix. So I can actually collapse that submix. I can collapse all the mixes that we have here, and it cleans things up very nicely. Obviously, you don't have near as much detail, but you can see everything that's coming into Logic at the same time. But this is just a good way so that you're not, especially in the mixer, as you collapse these and expand these, they do the same thing in the mixer view as well. And you can do the same thing with this arrow right here. You can expand or collapse. And again, if all these are expanded and I want to get all the way down to some drums or something, then that may be too far for me to go. And so I would just have the drums expanded is all that I would do. And that would let me come over here and say, okay, that's where I need to be, and make my adjustment, whatever it is there. While we're on the drums here, we do have, again, the same way as male and female voices are going to be EQ'd differently. Each and every drum and their respective microphone is going to take just a little bit extra care to produce what you want it to produce. So we have things that are set up in here. Of course, all the EQs and channel routing, everything is set up here in the top. But again, it all comes back to a drum mix that is here. So if I like the way the drums are mixed, like it's not that the snare is too loud or that the cymbals are too loud, it's that overall the drums are too loud, then instead of going in and making a little 0.5 adjustment down on each and every one of these, we would just come to the submix and adjust it by 0.5 down, and then we would have exactly what we were looking for, because all of these, if you'll notice, this is the output. You'll notice this output right here. So these are all outputting to bus 13, and bus 13 is this drum mix, and the drum mix is outputting just to the main out, the ST out stereo output there. And so that way everything is sort of like all, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 of these tracks, whatever it is right here, are going into this one track. We could then adjust global, that's what this is, a reverb. We could adjust global reverb on the drums if we wanted to. And then from there, it is sent out to the mains. So the main shows up over here. This is the stereo out, far right of the mixer screen. You don't normally see the master output here. I've actually got it to where it is showing up in the timeline here, but that doesn't normally happen that way. So you would have to adjust some settings up here to show master track. And so that's the reason I like using the mixer so much, because it's always going to show up down here in this stereo out. All right, this last thing that we have here to look at are all of our reverbs. So again, these are buses 1 through 7. We talked about for the drum bus earlier was bus 13. So you'll see that all these are outputting to bus 13. The input for this drum mix is bus 13. And the output is going to the mains. And so as we look at all of these, as we look at all these effects that we have, vocal reverb, vocal delay, guitar reverb, drum reverb, master reverb, shimmer, and then the sub sidechain. And so all of these are used wherever we need to use them, essentially. And so we were talking earlier on that purple channel, and we were talking about reverb. But more specifically, we were talking about vocal reverb. There is a separate guitar reverb, drum reverb, and master reverb that, again, are separate from that. So you can just adjust the reverb on the vocals. We do this a lot with, we need reverb while we're singing, but if in between songs we need to take a moment and there's a little spoken part that is in there, just a little, little pithy devotional or something like that, then whoever's running front of house and or the live stream mix would just pull that reverb down so that we're not listening to the echoey boominess that comes with the reverb and all the extra air that is added to that. It'll sound more like a speaking mic, and then we go into the next song and the front of house tech can just adjust that back up to where it was, and everything is the same. Everything is like it was before. So again, these are all routes. You can, we are bringing a signal in through a particular input that is being affected through the plugins that we have in here and the effects that we have. So we can, even though this is a drum channel, I could go to a different bus, and let's say I wanted to add shimmer to this mid-tom. For whatever reason, I would just add bus 6 there and just increase that until I liked the amount of shimmer that was on it. And that's that. You can, even though shimmer is not normally used on a drum, that may be what you want to use in that, in this particular case, in this particular setting. And so I love the flexibility of Logic. I love just how you can kind of figure it out in a sense. It's very user-friendly. The user interface of it is fairly straightforward, and once you understand sort of the why and the way things work, it becomes very straightforward to record and do just great mixes on. And so just want to show you one more here, and let's see, let's do this one. So this is a project that we did for Worship Wednesday. It was when you walk into the room and Here I Am to Worship. This is a medley that we put together. And so on this, it was just piano and a vocal. And so again, we recorded the vocal and the piano at the same time. Both of these were recorded at the exact same time. And again, in our project info up here, we had everything set up the way that it was, the way that it needs to be at least, that it's 72 beats per minute, 4/4, all that good stuff. And we recorded it. We were able to, without being connected directly to Logic ourselves, digitally we connected to Logic, and we played on the stage the same way that we normally perform on a Sunday or a Wednesday, but while it was being produced by the speakers at front of house, it was also being recorded by Logic. down here in the green room. And so we were able to come back and adjust and edit and do whatever we wanted to do to this vocal source right here, just because we had access to it. We had a separate multi-track recording that was just the vocal. And so we had, if there was an issue with the piano, or what, if we needed to punch in, if I needed to fix a part, or if adjust reverbs, or whatever I needed to do, if this were to be recorded in stereo, then we'd have to go back and re-record everything, meaning that everything would be recorded into essentially one channel, and the vocal and the piano would all be in one channel. And if something was wrong, or if I wanted to add reverb to the vocal, I would also have to be adding reverb to the piano because they're not separate from each other. But with multi-track recording, with Dante Virtual Sound Card and the whole network that is set up, we're able to record up to 32 channels at the same time, and bring those in effectively and with stability. It's the biggest thing, is that it's stable, because you want consistent performance out of musical equipment. You want it to react the same way each and every time. All right, I hope you were able to learn some stuff from this. I know it's kind of like sipping from a fire hydrant. There's just a bunch of information at the same time, but that's the reason it's a video. You can go back, watch it several times, rewind 20, 30 seconds, watch that part again, whatever you want to do, so that you can understand this a little bit better. It's a tool that I believe all worship leaders, all churches should be utilizing in some fashion. Now, you don't have to do Logic. This is a $300 piece of software. It is a one-time, it's a perpetual license. You don't have to continue to buy it every year or for every update or anything like that. There is a little money associated with this. There are free options out there. We talked about GarageBand earlier, that is free on Mac. And again, it's the exact same setup. If you were to watch this Logic video and go into GarageBand, you would have a very good starting point, a very good understanding of how to get the process started. There are, again, other free ones. If you're not a Mac user, if you're a PC user, there's one called Audacity that, again, has a lot of functionality to it. It's not as user-friendly in the sense as it doesn't look as good, in my sense, in my opinion. It doesn't have the nice little hotkeys to undo and redo things that you would, like turning the metronome on and off, things like that. So yeah, there are options out there. I believe that every church should be utilizing some digital audio workstation in some shape, form, or fashion, because it gives you an extra tool. Even if you use it to review, if you're not sending this or putting out content or anything like that, if you just went back and listened to your Sunday morning service in multi-track, and then you're not worried about like, well, I wonder which guitar player was a little slower than the other guitar player. You just come in and you solo those two guitar parts and you listen. You figure out which one was quote unquote right and which one was behind or ahead or whatever it is. And it just gives you much more capability to review. And again, every time you review, you make yourself better. That's the whole point of reviewing. And so, or to make your team better. So again, I hope you found this encouraging. I hope you found this as something that sort of piqued your interest, and maybe if you're not utilizing this, that you can begin to utilize this. We'll see you in the next video.